Hi there, this is William with Common Motor, that's common-motor.com. Today we're going to show you how to rebuild the carburetor on your CB450, CL450, or 500T. So let's get going. Alright, so these carburetors are pretty straightforward. They don't even have any screws on the float bowl. So you just go ahead and pop this little clip off. It only slides one way. The bowl is off. Gasket is off. The float kind of hinge pin here just presses right out with some sort of punch or screwdriver. So there's your float. Got the little needle valve there. Okay, let's move to the top of the carb. These come off with just two Phillips head screws. Got it. All right, let's knock this guy. There we go. So as you can see, this pulls out the slide. There's no diaphragm in these carburetors. It's more of just a tight tolerance between the two aluminum bits here. There's the top cap. We've got the slide here. The needle is held into the slide by this small flathead set screw that can often be stuck. That one was not too bad. So you can pull that out. That screw there. From there, the needle comes out with this little collar that slides on it. The old needle will have this E-clip on it. Our new one's a little bit different, and we'll show you that in just a minute. So there's the slide. Got our top cap gasket. Comes out. Alright, onto the little brass bits. We can take out the idle mixture screw here on the side. There are two different versions of this depending on if you have a late or early style carburetor, and we'll get more into that once we have all the parts laid out. It's got a spring. Pull this little plug here. Pop the needle seat. This is a 10mm socket, as many things on these motorcycles are. So there's the needle seat. Alright, last thing to do is to remove the jets. So I'll go start with the main jet. Looks like this one's a 130. And the secondary jet, looks like this one's a 38. And if you look down in those holes, you'll notice that there are two other brass pieces. The big one is an emulsifier tube, the smaller one is the idle jet. So let's get those out. Let's get the emulsifier tube loose. So there you go, your emulsifier tube and your idle jet, or low speed jet. Alright, underneath where the emulsifier tube was is the discharge nozzle. You can see it from this side pretty clearly. It's this little brass piece in there. It needs to be punched out from this side. So get a little round punch or something, go in there. You might have to tap on it a little bit to get it out, or just press it out. Alright, this one's a little stuck in there, so we put it on some wood blocks, and we're going to go ahead and use this round punch to tap out the discharge nozzle from the carburetor body. There you go. Empty hole, discharge nozzle. The last thing we need to do before we move to the parts washer is pull this little drain plug out of here, because we will be replacing the aluminum washer that's on it. So this carb is an early style, which you can tell from this early style drain screw, which is a small head, uses this aluminum washer to seal. The later style drain screws had a bigger head on them and used a O-ring to seal them up. So we're going to replace this aluminum washer. We're going to place the washer on this aluminum plug as well. Those are out here. We'll reuse both of those plugs. We'll reuse the emulsifier tube, the secondary jet, the needle set screw, the discharge nozzle, the float hinge, and we're going to inspect the float to find out if we need to replace it or not. So anytime you remove a float from a carburetor, there's a few simple things you can do to see if it's still holding air or not. The most easy thing to do is just shake it next to your ear. If you hear fluid floating around in there, that's gasoline that is leaked in, causing it to not function as a float anymore. You can also submerge it in some gasoline to see if it floats or if it sinks. A lot of times it'll float at first and slowly fill up with fuel and sink to the bottom. So since this, I can hear some gas on the inside. Upon inspection, you can see a small hairline crack here, and I'll show that to you. I can feel it with my screwdriver when I run across it right here. There's definitely a little crack in there, and that's where our gas is getting into our float. Okay, so this is the idle mixture screw that came out of our carburetor. Now, even though these carbs came off our long haul bike, which is a K7, it had an early style set of carbs on it, so someone must have replaced them at some point in time. The early style mixture screws can be identified by a O-ring recessed in the head there and a threaded shaft, no O-ring or washer at the bottom. The late style mixture screws have this threaded head here, a smooth shaft, a spring with a washer and an O-ring. And for this style of carburetor, you might have to fish out those tiny washers and O-rings from the carb body. Alright, so these are all the bits that we're going to replace that were in this carburetor already. It looked like these carbs had been rebuilt in the not too distant past. Everything's pretty clean, so we could have gotten by with just getting the 6072 seal and gasket kit for these carbs. But we're going to go ahead and just rebuild them all the way. So this is everything that comes in our 6148 early style 450 carb rebuild kit. The only difference between that and our 6248 late style kit is these bits right here for the idle mixture screw, which will be a little bit different. So let's go through everything that's included. We have our top cap gasket, our float bowl gasket, our float needle and seat and sealing washer. We have our main slide needle and collar. We have a sealing washer for this little aluminum plug here, and a sealing washer for the float bowl drain plug. We have a number 130 main jet and a number 38 idle jet. We've got our idle mixture screw with its O-ring and its spring. So in the future, we're working towards getting our emulsifier tube, discharge nozzle, and secondary jet included in the carb kits, but for now we just have them as add-on parts. So the 6049 on the website includes the secondary jet and the emulsifier tube. The discharge nozzle is available on request. Now, since we found our float had a crack in it, we're going to go ahead and replace it. Number 6074 on our website includes a new brass float and the little hinge pin for it. Alright, let's get this thing put back together. We've got the carb upside down, and we're going to start by putting everything in the bowl area. So we'll start with the main jet shaft here, putting in our discharge nozzle. You can see there's two distinct sides to it. This side is kind of tapered. This side is more blunt. The blunt side goes towards the bottom of the carburetor, in our case, upwards. Just drop it in there. It'll get pressed in by the emulsifier tube, which we are reusing. Not going to use a fresh one because this one seems just fine. Let's see, actually before I put that in there, I'm just going to put a couple of drops of oil in there, keep it from getting all jammed up. Okay, snug in there. We're going to do our fresh 130 main jet. Alright, moving on to the other two jets. We've got our fresh idle jet here. I'm going to do a little bit of oil on that one. Alright, and we're going to be reusing our secondary jet, which I'm going to put a drop of oil on. Get in here. Now this little tiny hole here at the bottom is very small, and you might want to go ahead and run a guitar string through it to make sure that it's clear. So I'm going to put that in there. There we go. All our jets back in place. Let's move on to the float needle and seat. Starting with the seat and the sealing washer. Drop oil on it. Again, this uses a 10mm socket or wrench. The socket's better. Honestly, it's usually just hand tight, but I'll give it a little bit of extra gusto on it. Get the needle down in there. Okay. Now we'll do our new float. We'll get set the height in a minute, but for now, let's just get it in there. There we go. That was easy. All right. The last thing to do here would just be the gasket, which you may or may not want to do right now to set the height. And we'll move on. All right, so let's go ahead and check our float height, which is important to do anytime you're rebuilding the carburetor. I went ahead and pulled the gasket back out because we want to be setting it relative to this surface that the gasket sits on here inside the float bowl. So I have my caliper set to 20mm, which is what Honda recommends the float height for this carb. So as I go to push on it, you can see that it's a little bit proud of 20mm. So we're going to pull it. Like that. We're going to try to bend the tab out just a little bit and see where that gets us. Come on, guy. Come on, guy. All right. Pretty spot on. So there you go. Roughly 20mm float height. You just want to get it right where the tab is touching the needle valve. Not compressing the little shaft with the spring inside like this, but just kind of resting on it. That's why we have it sitting at this orientation. Alright, now that the float height is set, we're going to finish up the bottom side of the carburetor, starting with this little aluminum plug here. I'm just going to put it down where it came from. Just snug. None of this stuff needs to be crazy tight. Remember, it's all aluminum and brass. So from there, we'll go ahead and put the float bowl gasket back on there. We're going to get the float bowl drain plug, its new sealing washer, and put it back in our new clean float bowl. It goes on this way. You can see here it can only be snapped on one way, so you need to make sure to have your clip on this side of the carburetor. So when you put it on, you can go ahead and snap it into place. And the bottom side's done, so let's flip it over. Alright, now we got the carb flipped right side up. And a couple of things to notice here with the slide. There's a few tests you want to go ahead and do to make sure that it's not hanging up. The first thing would be the top cap. I'm going to put the slide back on the top cap and make sure that it has no hang-ups. You rotate it around and make sure it's not catching, because then it's going to catch once it's on your bike and then it's not going to run right. So this one looks like it's free all the way around, so it's clean good. If it's catching up, you might have to run around these surfaces with a piece of fine sandpaper. Just make sure they're really clean. They go together dry, so don't try putting a bunch of grease in there or anything. This is what you want to see here. The next test you want to do is to make sure it slides freely in the carb body. So you'll notice that there's a groove here with a little peg inside, and you have to line those up there. Get it down in there, and you should see it. No resistance there. Same thing goes if you find it catching. Might need to take some light sandpaper or a Scotch-Brite pad or something and go around the slide and the carb body. But this one looks like it's pretty good shape. So next thing to do would be to put the needle back inside. We're going to take our replacement needle, which is a slightly different style than the one that came out of there, but that's not a problem, as well as a little collar it comes with. Slide it down in there, put it into the slide itself, and take the set screw we pulled out, put it back in. The needle is a little bit loose in there. That's not a problem. That's how it's supposed to be. All right, now that the needle's back in there, time to get the slide into the carb body. You're going to want to put the gasket on dry, just like that. Line up your groove on the slide with the little peg inside the carb body. Make sure the needle finds its way into the discharge nozzle. And there we go. Once that's on there, you can go to put the top cap back on. Now these top caps have this plastic cap on them that sometimes can crack, and if you find that you have any little cracks in here, it's not going to hold air properly, it's not going to make the slide work properly. So the fix for that is just to put a light layer of epoxy on the top of here to seal up this little plastic cap. Ours look like they're in good shape, so we're just going to put them right back on. Line it up. Went ahead and got some Allen screws from the hardware store to replace the old Phillips heads, so put them on there with a little bit of anti-seize and split washers. Get it snug. There you have it. The last thing to do, is to get the idle mixture screw in here. So we're going to go ahead and oil the whole thing up, because it can be kind of tricky to get the O-ring up in its little groove. So you got to slide it up, and then take some sort of flat head or otherwise and just get it going. Work it around. There you go. The spring goes on there and back into our carburetor, just like so. Now remember, the other style idle mixture screw has the little O-ring and washer at the bottom. This one does not. So we're going to go ahead and get it screwed, seated all the way in, and we're going to back it out about a turn and a half. That'll be a good starting point. All right, we've got the car back together, just like that. We're going to go ahead and check if the slide is moving freely in the carburetor, and I'll show you a trick to do that. You'll see two holes here at the top of the intake of the carburetor. You're going to want to go ahead and cover one of those up and blow in the other one to see if the slide is doing what it should. Okay, so as you could see, our slide moves up and down freely. If you find that your slide does not move without catching, there's a few things you can do. The first is just to loosen the top cap and tighten it back down again. Sometimes it gets cocked to the side, and loosening it fixes the problem. If not, you can rotate it 180 degrees. That's not a problem. If that doesn't fix it, you can swap the top caps between carburetors. There might be a body slide top cap combo that works best between your collection of parts. If none of that does the job, you can always take it back apart again, resurface, use a little bit of light sandpaper or Scotch-Brite pad to make sure everything is nice and smooth. Alright, the last thing to do before we put these back on the bike is do a bench sync, which we have another video for, so go ahead and watch that. I'll go ahead and show you a few slight differences between the CB and CL450 carbs and the 500T carbs, which are very similar. So the 500T has many similarities with the 450s. The carbs are mostly the same with a few exceptions. For one, it has this anti-backfiring diaphragm sort of mechanism and a vacuum port here. Now the rebuild kits that we have for the 500T carbs are the 6348. They do not come with this diaphragm, but these are available as an add-on. It's the 6076, and you can replace all the bits in that too. Alright, so once you've rebuilt one of the carburetors, you know exactly how to rebuild the other carburetor, because they are exactly the same. So here we go. We have both of our long-haul 450 carbs rebuilt and ready to go back on the bike. I'm William with Common Motor. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, as well as subscribe to our newsletter and YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time. Go in there. You might have to tap on it a little bit to get it out, or just press it out. Fuck, this thing is in there. God damn.